Another week brings another wave of threat actors, malicious payloads, and compromised systems. In today's episode, we'll be diving into some of the latest intelligence being shared by our incredible community over in the LimaCharlie Slack channel. A huge shout out to everyone who contributes. It's because of your insights that we can keep these discussions going. If you find these intel briefings useful and you're not already part of our Slack community, you're missing out. There's a constant flow of interesting conversations and valuable information being shared there in real time, usually more than we can cover in a single episode. You can join the conversation at slack.limacharlie.io. And as always, I'm joined by the one and only Matt Bromley. How are you doing today, sir?
Chris, there he is. I'm doing well, sir. Doing well. I'm actually excited. Right before this episode, right before we started recording this, you actually shared some feedback we got from one of our listeners. And I'm just happy to say we're getting feedback from consistent listeners. That's really it. Yeah. I won't mention the content of the feedback. I will just simply say it's great. It was positive. I'll leave it at that. But it's great to always hear that some folks are actually listening to us and they've got some thoughts and feedback on things we can do or things they like and don't like. And I'm just super happy. So I like to start off with a little bit of gratitude towards that listener base that we've got and say thank you all so much for tuning in to us. Chris and I think started these discussions as like, let's just talk about some threat related stuff. And now it's like every week we look forward to it. So thank you to our listeners out there.
Yeah, appreciate the feedback for sure. And I'm going to start today's episode. I got a couple of a little bit of good news and something that's often not full of much good news. So ransomware payments saw a significant drop in 2024, falling by 35% compared to the previous year. According to a report by Chainalysis, total payments to ransomware operators amounted to approximately $813.55 million, down from the record $1.1 billion seen in 2023. This decline is attributed to improved defensive measures by organizations, increased law enforcement actions, and a shift in attackers' tactics that rely more on data exfiltration rather than direct encryption-based extortion. Despite the decrease in payments, ransomware activity itself remains high, with attackers continuing to target critical infrastructure, healthcare, and financial institutions. So I know it's not a huge win, but it's a win, and the numbers are moving in the right direction. So bravo, everybody. That's good work.
That's a win. Security industry should take that as a win. Payments went down. Now, I will note this article does call out something very interesting, which is like you can't totally let your guard down just yet, which they're very clear about. Like it's not over. There's no guarantee or promise that in 2025 it will continue to trend down. We hope so, right? We hope that investments in security show a trending downwards. But we actually saw this, Chris, this analysis from Chainalysis. I have to pronounce that one carefully there. 2021 was the first year ransomware beat $1 billion. 2022, it dropped down to $700 million. 2023, it went back up to $1.25 billion. So I don't want to be like the stormy gray cloud over the sunny day, but I do want to say that it's great that we saw a change in 2024, an impact. I would encourage security teams to continue to invest in whatever those changes might have been and start to offer, some impact, some reprieve, whatever it might be to those. And then let's try and follow that. So if you were doing something in 2024 that worked, either from a mitigation perspective or from a prevention perspective or some sort of early detection sign or whatever, keep investing in those things if it worked out. Chris, I'm not going to go too far on a tangent here, but I will go down a little bit of one. One of the interesting metrics that we see in security is something called return on mitigation. So rather than thinking about I bought this tool and how much money did I make back from this tool? One way to look at it as I bought this tool, how much did this tool prevent me from losing? What types of mitigation did it inside? And here's a great statistic to rope into those types of calculations. I think if you're someone who's, looking for a way to justify some security investments, CISOs who might be listening, executives, managers, think about, okay, cool. Globally, according to Chainalysis, ransom payments went down, which means there's been some impactful things around there because we know threat actors haven't stopped. Chris and I talk about them every single week. Threat actors have not stopped at all. So what are we doing right? Let's figure out what it is and keep doing more of what we're doing right.
Yeah. So one of the key reasons for the drop in payments is attributed to the growing resistance from victims who are opting not to pay ransoms even when attacked. Cyber insurance policies have also played a role as insurers increasingly refuse to cover ransom payments or encourage policyholders to invest in stronger cybersecurity measures instead. Additionally, law enforcement agencies worldwide have become more aggressive in tracking and dismantling ransomware groups, making it riskier for criminals to operate. However, The report also notes that attackers are adapting by focusing on stealing and leaking sensitive data, which can still pressure victims into paying without traditional encryption-based attacks. While overall ransomware payments have decreased, some groups continue to make substantial profits. For example, Black Cat or Alfie and Lockbit remain highly active, employing advanced techniques to bypass security measures. The report highlights that while fewer organizations are paying ransoms, the sophistication of attacks is increasing, meaning that cybersecurity efforts must continue to evolve. Experts caution that while the drop in payments is a positive trend, it does not necessarily indicate a long-term decline in ransomware threats. Attackers are shifting strategies, and the risk of extortion through data leaks remains high. So yeah, that's what I'm curious about here. So we saw the total amount of payments made for ransomware attacks go down, but it mentions the shift in tactics to exfiltration and then, holding that data hostage. I'd like to see the sum of them both, because I imagine it's a growth industry, cyber crime, and it probably continues to go up across the board.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Chris. I'm really hoping we didn't take a bunch of money out of pool A, put a little bit in pool B, and then say, oh, pool A is smaller now. That's progress, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I think one of the big lines you picked up on there, the important one, and not to give them too much credit, but cyber insurance providers increasingly like demanding higher security standards and things. And I think one of the I'm gonna say like little known things in security, or maybe it's one of the like well-known things or unspoken things that no one ever talks about, is that it was going to take some sort of compliance or monetary driven effort in order to actually increase the defenses that people have. And if it's your cyber insurance policy requires you to go above and beyond what you may want to do, then that's better. That's better for everyone. And I'm a big fan of it. I don't know if tying it to insurance is the best way to do it. I'd rather it was just inherent security. However, it's still a positive thing to see.
Yeah, I recently interviewed the CEO of a company called UATest that deals in compliance software around identity management. Shout out to Garrett Grajek. And I asked him if he thought that we'd see less compliance under this current administration and how that would impact organizations' posture. And he said it didn't matter whether there was regulations pushed down from the government or not, because it's insurance and lawsuits that actually drive compliance.
Always,
government.
Always. Yep.
Money talks. All right, here's another one for the Schadenfreude files. Law enforcement agencies have arrested a suspected core member of the 8-base ransomware group, making a significant development in efforts to combat cybercrime. According to reports, the suspect was apprehended in an international operation involving multiple agencies, although specific details about their identity and location remain undisclosed. 8-base has been active in ransomware groups known for its data extortion tactics, often targeting small and medium-sized businesses. Unlike some ransomware groups that rely on advanced encryption methods, 8-base primarily focuses on data theft and threatening to leak sensitive information if victims refuse to pay. This sounds like maybe where some of that ransomware money has gone.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that this is definitely feels a little bit like that. But who knows? I mean, you never know. The thing is, like, I always get a little dismayed when I see these articles, Chris, because it starts off with some great stuff, like, law enforcement takes down, globally coordinated law enforcement takes down this thing, blah, blah, blah. And then you read about it and it's like, yeah, these suspects have accused of stealing $16 million. And you're like, really? Like, we just talked about the global average or the global total sum, according to Chainalysis, dropping to like 800 million. And all we could do was bust 16 million. I mean, can we get a little larger representation, more than maybe 5% or 0.5% here? But nonetheless,
and don't forget the servers were back up in 2 days.
Of course they were. Of course they were. But I mean, it just goes, I guess, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And maybe this is part of it. But honestly, a huge hat tip, as always, to the global law enforcement community for bringing this together. I really do think that things like this can make an impact against deterring certain nations from being hotbeds of this type of activity. And this might sound a little bit like a roundabout method there, Chris, but if we go through and we kind of, okay, I can't set up shop here, I can't set up shop here. If you kind of really call down the list of countries where these ransomware operators can, launch shop and successfully operate without being, shut down and stuff, maybe you created a form of a geopolitical noose you can start to tighten. I'm not sure, right? But maybe something will come out of it. Who knows? But I'm always happy to see these coordinated efforts take things down, because as far as I'm concerned, it is a massive win for the industry, in addition to what we talked about earlier, which is payments going down and then operators being taken down. Let's just continue to see more of this. I'll take the upward trend in happiness.
Yeah, we got to keep those cyber criminals nervous when they go on vacation, right?
Always. Yeah. I want them walking on the planes shaking and saying, you know what, maybe I don't walk on the planes right now. But the flip side is when they don't walk on planes, they go and ransom more organizations. So maybe we want them to take vacation. I'm not sure.
There you go. So this arrest follows a broader trend of increased law enforcement actions against ransomware groups. In recent months, authorities have successfully disrupted operations linked to major cyber criminal organizations, including Lockbit and Black Cat or Alpha V. These efforts have been aided by international collaboration, intelligence sharing, and the advanced tracking of cryptocurrency transactions used for ransom payments. However, experts warn that while arrests like this may temporarily disrupt ransomware activities, they rarely lead to the complete dismantling of a group. Many cybercriminal operations have decentralized structures, allowing them to continue operation even after key members are taken into custody. Despite this arrest, 8base remains a threat, with recent attacks targeting various industries. There we go. That's the server back up in 2 days.
Yep.
The group has been known for rebranding tactics, making it difficult to track their activities under a single name. Security researchers emphasize that organizations should remain vigilant by implementing strong cybersecurity defenses, including regular backups, employee training, and robust endpoint protection. While law enforcement efforts are making progress, ransomware groups continue to evolve, adapting their methods to avoid detection and maximize profits. So yeah, I mean, money makes the world go round. Money drives compliance. Money also drives these folks to continue going even when their leadership is taken out of the picture.
It does. Remember, security advocates, defenders, analysts, everyone out there. A lot of times when you bring down pieces of malware or shut down that access method or stop that threat actor, whatever it might be, you're fighting a revenue source for some people. I'm not saying it's right. It is definitely illegitimate. But remember, you're fighting revenue. You're fighting livelihoods. I've said for a long time, Chris, in many forums, like if you want to pick a losing battle, fight one with revenue. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of times. So yeah, these groups just pop right up very quickly. I think one thing that you called out here that the Register pointed out in this article, which is definitely an important part to have, is kind of the cyber criminal operations having decentralized structures and whatnot. And as much as I don't want to take the thunder away from these global takedowns that we see, but a lot of times it's kind of like the proverbial you cut the head off the snake and 4 more show up, or one of those things where like you take down a little bit of the scaffolding, but the rest of it still remains intact. And it's like, well, that's the piece we could have taken down. Not to dismay those types of efforts. I'm happy to see them, but it is important for folks to know that like, just because 1 or 2 people maybe that headed up a particular group during a particular window of time get taken down, it does not mean the whole group itself is taken down, right? This is not that sort of physical shakeup where simultaneously everybody's arrested at the same time. It's who's in the wrong place at the right time from a law enforcement perspective. Who are we able to capture? What types of signals were sent out and what types of fail safes do they have in place? And I hate to say, because they're revenue generating machines, they've got pretty robust fail safes in place where if so-and-so doesn't check in within a 48-hour window, another group takes over or another team takes over. Next thing you know, boom, we're up and running, Because another thing to keep in mind here, Chris, is there's likely active ransomware negotiations or discussions during this time, right? It's not like it's bankers hours where it's like, oh, we got these guys after 6 p.m. and they weren't working. They might have 3 or 4 deadlines running simultaneously against their victims. And then when someone gets taken down, someone else has got to jump in and fix those out. So yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something to have. That's right. I should say definitely something to be wary of.
Okay, so here we are back to the doom and gloom reports. The XE Group, a financially motivated cybercrime organization, has shifted its tactics from traditional card skimming attacks to more sophisticated supply chain compromises. According to a new report, the group, which has been active since at least 2020, previously focused on mage cart-style attacks, injecting malicious JavaScript into e-commerce checkout pages to steal payment data. However, researchers have now observed XE Group targeting third-party service providers that integrate with multiple retailers, allowing them to compromise numerous merchants at once. This approach increases their attack scale while making detection more challenging. This is interesting. Java injection of the shopping cart at checkout time sounds like something shifty.
Yeah, just a little bit. Absolutely. I think I actually might have posted this one into the Intel channel because I was reading through it. I found this one pretty interesting. Big reason I called this up, and I think Chris is going to talk about this one in just a moment here. But when you see groups kind of shift their tactics like this is always something to. I think it's something to take note from, like, interesting what happened here, especially when you see such a drastic change like this. I'm not going to say that, software is so wildly different that the team is completely brand new and whatnot. But when you got a group that, 4 or 5 years ago was skimming credit card numbers and has now shifted to supply chain attacks. And I know Chris is going to talk about this a little bit more detail in just a second here. There's really like some sort of wow, this group leveled up, right? In this case, you do see the opposite sometimes where groups level down. Sometimes you have nation state threat actors who are found like, deploying crypto miners or something. You're like,
I knew you were going to say crypto miners.
What happened here? Would you guys, is the B squad on the front line? But the other side of it is when you see groups change and upgrade like this, it makes it for not only a very interesting discussion, but you also see a little bit of like their old tactics and techniques kind of roped into the overall attack strategy. You see kind of some of those habits come through, which I've always found really interesting. I actually posted a copy of the code from this blog post into the Intel chat here. But this group, way back in 2020 was known for using pretty complex SQL injection techniques to gain access to then subsequently deploy card skimmers. Well, they actually brought that SQL injection to the supply chain attacks that they're conducting. And I always find it interesting when you have a threat actor who 4 or 5 years ago developed a certain trait or a piece of behavior, and then you see it show up again. And you're like, hold on, this feels familiar. It feels like the same group. Oh my gosh, did these guys change their tactics? Did they upgrade? Did they get smarter? That's the really interesting threat intel discussion that I think goes on behind the scenes. But Chris, I think you've got some more insight on like what they're doing now.
Yeah. So one of the key developments in XE Group strategy is the use of vulnerabilities in widely adopted software frameworks and content management systems to inject skimmers upstream. By compromising a single service provider, the attackers can automatically distribute malicious code to all merchants relying on that service, effectively bypassing traditional security measures. This supply chain attack model is similar to the techniques used in other high-profile incidents such as the SolarWinds breach, but with a specific focus on financial theft. Security researchers note that this evolution demonstrates how cybercriminals are adapting to more resilient e-commerce security measures by shifting their focus to upstream targets. Mitigating these attacks requires a multi-layered security approach. Businesses must not only secure their own websites, but also rigorously vet third-party services and monitor for unauthorized script injections. Experts recommend implementing content security policies, sub-resource integrity checks, and real-time monitoring for suspicious activity. While XE Group's new approach presents additional challenges for defenders, awareness of their tactics can help organizations take proactive steps to protect customer payment data. I'm mostly surprised that MySQL is still being used so widely.
I'm not. I would, and sorry, I just, man, I'm surprised at the amount of things that are still being used widely these days, just to the point where you're like, really? That's still happening? I think we talked earlier, maybe it was last week's episode where we talked about BoltDB and a typo squatting thing that was happening with a Go library. And to me, that's just another one of those situations where it's like, not only do I get surprised when I hear about esoteric things that I don't know about being used, like what's the actual victim range here, then I also have to think about it the other way, which is like, the technologies that are still in use after all these times. I mean, I had someone the other day talk to me about integrating with PostgreSQL, and I was like, man, I haven't used one of those in quite a while. And I just did a little bit of Googling, a little bit of research just to see. And of course, it's still one of the top databases that's out there. Nothing against the technology itself. It's just sometimes you hear these names, you don't use them for a while, and then you hear them again a couple years later, and you're like, oh, wow, that thing's still around. It's like, yeah, 15 years strong. And you're like, I didn't know I was that old. So thank you for that trip down memory lane.
I think my first job out of university, I was working for a company subcontracted to one of the government agencies up here in Canada, and we were building JSP on top of Java with a C backend that was fed into Postgres. So that was a lovely time, let me tell you.
Chris, we may need to make a note in our calendar because on the 23rd of May this year, my SQL will be 30 years old.
Whew.
So yeah, reaching its 30s.
Should we have a birthday party?
I don't know if we're recording an episode on that day, but if we are, we'll make a point to make it to make a note. I'll take a look at the calendar and see what's going to happen.
I do remember my friends throwing a party probably almost a decade ago now when the Unix timestamp rolled over.
Oh
the
yeah,
major
yeah, that's
digits.
right.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember. Wow. Remember when Y2K was a big deal? Wasn't that yesterday?
All right. Security researchers at Watchtower have demonstrated a supply chain attack technique that surpasses the scale and stealth of the infamous SolarWinds breach. That's 2 times that's mentioned today. And I will note that they just got acquired, I think, for like $4.5 billion by somebody, which seems like a strange amount for a company with a history like that.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah. In a recent study, the team performed controlled tests that sent over 8 million requests to various software ecosystems, revealing how attackers could exploit weaknesses in modern software development and deployment pipelines. Their findings highlight the dependency, confusion, typo squatting, and package impersonation remain critical risks, allowing attackers to inject malicious code into widely used software components with minimal detection. Unlike the SolarWinds attack, which required access to a specific vendor's build system, the techniques outlined by Watchtower could be executed with little to no privileged access.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to be clear here about this. First off, no offense to the folks at Watchtower. What I'm about to say isn't, I don't think it's a bad reflection on this, Chris. I want to be clear. Based on what I was reading through this, first off, Watchtower spends the first part of this blog post talking about how they would be better off making memes instead of doing security research work. And I'm not sure why you'd start a post like that, but whatever. Felt a little bit like I don't know, if I'm on your site reading your blog, you don't need to give me the history of why you're writing the blog. I'm already here. All right. Number one, we'll put that there. But in any event, props to the Watchtower team for calling out that they have, quote, historically delivered research that's shown a spotlight on the security impact of abandoned infrastructure. That's what this is. This is security. This is abandoned infrastructure. Long story short, I'll break this down, and Chris might delve into this a little bit deeper as well. They went about registering S3 buckets, S3 buckets that were no longer registered. Now, a quick note about this, and I'm going to read through this here. We ended up discovering about 150 Amazon S3 buckets that had previously been used across commercial and open source products and then abandoned. And then they registered them, and then they turned on logging to pay attention to who requested what. That's what it was. They went through and, yeah, I mean, I'm going to say abandoned infrastructure attack is maybe the best way to think about this, because it's like, there's still legacy software out there making requests to buckets that don't exist. And there's likely nothing in the code, nor would you expect there to be, that says, oh, this bucket no longer exists. Don't make this request ever again. It just keeps trying and gets a 404 and it's done. So they went and did this. Chris, let me be clear. Like, this isn't necessarily new and novel research. I know that for a very long time, when an attacker uses a particular domain and then that domain becomes available for sale, you're able to register that domain and just turn on monitoring and be like, oh, look, there's all the C2 implants that are still out there. I actually have, I'll leave it at this, personal experience with this. I was running an interactive workshop with someone, Eric Capuano, who I think a lot of the folks at LimaCharlie know as well. And we actually did this. We actually found a legacy domain that was tied to a nation state actor. We registered the domain for legitimacy of our scenario and ended up turning on logging for like 30 seconds. And I was like, oh, cool. There's like 3 IP addresses still checking in. I didn't delve any deeper into it. Right.
Yeah.
But this idea of abandoned infrastructure needs to be coupled with legacy software still making requests to that abandoned infrastructure as well. Without that, you're just typo squatting on old S3 buckets. So not to take away from Watchtower, this is definitely interesting research. I think the list of companies, I think you're going to talk about this in a second, the list of companies or organizations that were making some of these requests is definitely something to pay attention to. But there's a lot of sarcasm inside of this blog post, which is kind of like, just stick to the facts. That's just me. And also, I'm going to be very clear here and say, I'd be very careful to go and say that this rivals or casts a shadow on the SolarWinds attack, right? Making the SolarWinds attack look amateur by registering an abandoned S3 bucket is completely different from silently infiltrating the code build process of a multi-billion-dollar national company or international company.
And then implanting yourself downstream on
And then implanting
hundreds of other
yourself
companies.
downstream and doing so quietly and not getting detected until a very complex security incident happened involving one of the top security firms in the world, other which you were silent for 9 months. But yeah, good luck. Everybody can dream.
And to my comment earlier, SolarWinds was acquired for $4.4 billion by Turn River. So go Google that and you can get all the juicy details. So one of the key revelations from this research is how easily attackers can compromise entire software ecosystems by exploiting misconfigured package repositories. The researchers demonstrated how adversaries could poison software supply chains by publishing malicious versions of commonly used dependencies, tricking automated build systems into pulling the compromised packages. This technique is particularly dangerous in open source environments where developers frequently rely on external libraries without rigorous validation. The scale of the attack surface is vast, as modern applications often incorporate thousands of dependencies, making it difficult to detect a single compromised package. Mitigation strategies include implementing strict dependency management policies, using private package repositories, and continuously monitoring for unauthorized package updates. Is this the same one?
Feels like it, right?
Yeah. Mitigation strategies include implementing strict dependency management policies, using private package repositories, and continuously monitoring for unauthorized package updates. Organizations are also encouraged to adopt a software bill of materials to track and validate the integrity of dependencies. While SolarWinds highlighted the risks of direct vendor compromise, this research underscores a broader, more scalable attack vector that could affect a wide range of industries. As software supply chains grow more complex, security teams must remain vigilant to the evolving threats that targeted the very foundation of software development.
100%. Well said, Chris.
S3 buckets, eh? S3 buckets.
As it dwarfs the SolarWinds attack. 8 million requests.
So the thing about a blog, Matt, is you have to have people click on your articles. I think there might be some stuff there.
I'm just going to say it's security research. And when the very first thing that I read is, surprise, surprise, we've done it again. It's like, okay, all right, guys, just get to the point.
Pat yourself on the back. And,
congratulations. I mean, it's your blog. You can say whatever you want. I just find it interesting that you'd start off with, hey, what have you been working on lately? I did it again. Anyways, we'll leave that there. Watchtower folks, you're probably doing some awesome work. I'm not too familiar with the types of stuff that you do, but the attack service management platform looks awesome. I did a little bit of research before all this. I know you've got wide industry spread. By no means am I like dogging on the platform or whatsoever. I just found it to be a very, very confident blog post. We'll leave it at that.
All right. Last one I got for us today. A newly discovered cyber espionage campaign is targeting government and military entities in South Asia. According to researchers at Unit 42, the attackers, whose origin is not yet confirmed, are using a combination of spear phishing emails and custom malware to gain persistent access to victim networks. The campaign employs previously undocumented malware families designed for reconnaissance, credential theft, and long-term espionage operations. Researchers note that the attack infrastructure and tactics align with known nation-state threat actors, though attribution remains unclear. The primary goal appears to be intelligence gathering with a focus on diplomatic, defense, and strategic sectors. I find this interesting. We've got undocumented malware families, and they're not sure who's doing it. So that sounds like something interesting.
No, this one's a really interesting article here, because I feel like if you read through this, and anyone here who's got some experience with a certain state nexus threat actors will probably see a lot of clues inside of this. They talk about targeting telecommunications organizations. We just read about that. We assess with moderate high confidence that this activity originates in a certain country who's known for using plugx and whatnot. So there's a lot of like little things inside of it that I find very interesting, Chris, because there's a lot of like, it's almost like the breadcrumbs are on the ground, and you're like, someone pick those up. I don't want to say it, but someone pick those up, pretty please.
How come nobody wants to say it? That's what I'm curious about. Is it that they don't want to be wrong, or they don't want to like get in trouble from one of these folks?
I think, honestly, part of me, I think it's one of those like, here we go again things where it's just like, we've identified and Unit 42 team, I'm saying this in support of you, I promise. But there's like we've identified this thing. Oh, cool. It's related to China. Here we go again. And it's not necessarily like 100% guaranteed to be China, but it's a lot of stuff that looks very similar, Chris. But
Right.
the issue with that is if we were to just immediately, kind of scream that out and just be, yep, definitely it's this threat actor, you unfortunately can actually leave yourself up to a lot of biases as you perform analysis and whatnot. So I do give the article credit. They do say we assess with moderate high confidence this activity originates in China, but they're doing so based on attacker behaviors. They're not doing so because it's tying back to a particular IP address or something. There's a lot of other stuff tied in. And then they do offer evidence to support that, which is the most important threat intel read in this article. This is a great dissection of how to read and interpret this. They talk about PlugX as the main backdoor. It's been used primarily amongst Chinese-speaking threat groups. They talk in here about the use of, where was it? They talk about the use of soft ether VPN. Software is flexible, multi-protocol support. It has been used widely by threat actors in Chinese-related groups and things like that. They talk about how there's all sorts of evidence that ties back to China Nexus groups without saying, this is China, right? So I think it's actually a more interesting way, Chris, to kind of deliver that message by saying, here's the evidence. Here's what we've seen it tied to. Evidence tied. Here's why our confidence level is what it is. I would highly encourage anybody in threat intel, detection engineering, or anything like that to read this. I love the way this blog post was put together, not just because of the interest of it, but also because of the way that they back up and support their decisions and their evidence as well. So hat tip to the team that put this together, Lior and Yov. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, number one. Number two, I think this is going to be an interesting collection of threat indicators or an interesting collection of intel to bring together because they do timeline the progression of the group from May 2024 through November 2024. We see some things pretty static. The use of IIS server exploits, Cobalt Strike shows up quite a few times, but then there's little changes here and there. In some cases, there's Metasploit used in addition or in replace of Cobalt Strike. In some cases, there's Mimikatz. In some cases, there's not. In some cases, SQL servers show up. In some cases, they don't. It's a wide, diverse range of tactics here, Chris, which might be the other hesitancy to say this is 100% the same people from the same place because there is a wide variance of techniques in use here.
Hey, and I wonder how often nation-state agencies will try and make themselves look like someone else to kind of obfuscate what the real source is, too. I imagine that comes into play quite often as well.
Yeah, that's the other hesitancy, I think, is because red herrings are possible. We've seen it done by many state threat actors to look like other state threat actors as well. And it's just one of those situations where you assess with as much confidence as you can, but there may always be a little bit of a step of even though it's a high confidence assessment, could it be somebody acting as if correct? Or could we mislabel who we think it is? So this is another very important distinction for folks out there. And because we're talking about this article, I'll pick on China Nexus, but that doesn't mean it's definitive. It could be Russia Nexus, it could be Iran Nexus, it could be other Asian nation Nexus, because we've seen we talked earlier about XE, which I believe is Vietnam based earlier, right? Just because we say state nexus does not mean it is the intelligence apparatus of that particular state, right? We've seen APT groups that have relied on subcontractors, private industry. We've seen APT groups that have been a loose collection of some state influence plus some freelancers. I mean, it's tough to sometimes put that that label on and say, oh, this is 100% an intelligence-led operation, and it's it might not be. And that's we're splitting hairs in the adverbs and the adjectives, but those adverbs and adjectives are the ones that define sanctions and geopolitical, differences and all sorts of stuff. And I would argue and say that in early 2025, you want to be very clear and careful about which state you accuse of what.
Yeah. Oh, that's understatement of the year so far, right there.
Yeah, it's only February.
So one of the notable aspects of this campaign is the use of advanced evasion techniques. The attackers are leveraging compromised legitimate websites to deliver payloads, reducing the likelihood of detection. They also use multi-stage infection chains where the initial payload serves as a downloader for more sophisticated malware, allowing them to adapt based on the target environment. The malware families identified include keyloggers, remote access Trojans, and tools designed for lateral movement within the networks. These capabilities suggest a well-resourced and highly targeted operation rather than opportunistic cybercrime. Defending against this type of attack requires a combination of strong email security, endpoint detection and response, and strict access controls. Organizations in South Asia, particularly those in government and defense sectors, are advised to monitor for signs of compromise and implement threat intelligence feeds to detect indicators of attack. While attribution is still being investigated, the sophistication of the campaign suggests involvement by a state-sponsored actor with long-term interest in intelligence collection. Now, I know I just said you stated the understatement of the year, but I believe this advice that South Asian governments and defense sectors are advised to monitor for signs of compromise might actually be the understatement of the year.
Yeah. No, I would say if that's not an ongoing effort or initiative of yours, you've got some homework to do.
Yeah,
absolutely. Depending on where you are. But yeah, very, very true.
Awesome. Okay, Matt, we made it through another one. I felt a little tongue-tied today, but hopefully it comes through okay. Editor, maybe take some notes there.
I think we'll be good. Chris, always a pleasure. Good seeing you. And I'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, take care, sir.
See ya.